He had no past, no name, no idea where he came from. And one day, in 2012, the man with no identity sat in front of a borrowed computer, made a Reddit account, and asked the internet for help with a deceivingly simple question. Who am I? I am an amnesiac who woke up with no memories in 2004. Nobody knows who I am. Ask me anything. In his post, the man talked about the mysterious circumstances of what could be described as his second birth. It was August 31st, 2004. Just after 6 a.m. at a Burger King in Richmond Hill, Georgia. Sanyo R., a crew member at the fast food restaurant, stepped outside to take out the trash, and that's when she saw him. A middle-aged man lying naked behind the dumpster. Though it was still morning, his skin was already sunburned and blistered. His body was covered in fire ants. A red rash bloomed across his back and legs, raw and angry from the bites. He wasn't moving. Sanyo screamed and ran inside to get help. By the time emergency responders arrived, the man had begun to stir, disoriented, confused, and unable to speak coherently. No signs of assault, no clear injuries, no belongings, no clothes, no ID, just a nameless body, nearly dead, discarded behind a dumpster. An ambulance took the unidentified male, also known as a John Doe, to St. Joseph's Hospital in Savannah, where he was admitted under the placeholder name Burger King Doe. Years later, when the man with no identity shared his extremely strange origin story on Reddit, the questions began pouring in. Are you a time traveler? Everyone is a time traveler. They're born, they live, and they die. Do you have any characteristics of past addictions? How bad was your health? Could you have been homeless? One of the initial reports said that my lab results were surprisingly normal, indicating that I was in good health considering that I was just a homeless bum. No characteristics of past addictions. When the man had first been brought to the hospital after being found behind the dumpster, at first glance, he appeared to be a relatively healthy white male in his mid-50s. With a long, unwashed beard and cracked fingernails, he looked like someone who had been living on the streets for years. But nothing about him quite added up. His vitals were stable, no drugs or alcohol in his system. His labs were what one doctor called surprisingly within normal limits. There was, however, signs of past trauma. 3 shallow depressions on his skull, some scars on his left arm and neck, but nothing acute. No bruises or broken bones, no clear cause for his current state. He kept his eyes tightly shut, refused to eat, spoke only in murmurs. But when touched by hospital staff, he flinched violently, flailing his arms, jerking his legs. After several days, when Burger King Doe finally began to speak, he was asked for his name. They call me BK around here, the man replied. A nurse gently asked again for his real name. BK, he said again, but you're getting me confused. And with that, he was silent again for days. What was it like to wake up remembering nothing? Were you panicked or upset when you woke up? No. I was just in a daze. While this was true at first, on the 8th day of his hospitalization, everything changed. BK became agitated, angry. He lashed out at the nurses, cursing them, calling them beasts and demons. He demanded to see a priest. When one arrived, he turned on him too, denouncing him as an imposter. Psychiatrists observed his concerning behavior closely. Their initial diagnosis was catatonic schizophrenia, and thus began administering powerful antipsychotics. Apart from that, his vision was almost non-existent. Untreated cataracts clouded his world to the point that he couldn't even make out facial features in the fog. But even as BK would begin to calm down and become more coherent, the case would only get stranger. Eventually, BK was transferred to the psychiatric unit at Memorial Health, a public hospital across town. That's when the formal interviews began. What's your name? I don't know. Where are you from? Maybe Indianapolis? Do you remember anyone? Family? Friends? I think I have brothers? 3, but I can't see their faces. He described fragments of a life he may have lived, the inside of an old movie theater, a road cutting through a cornfield, streets he believed belonged to Denver, but the details were inconsistent. No names, no concrete places. The only thing he seemed certain of was his date of birth, August 29th, 1948. How do you know how old you are? I was born 10 years before Michael Jackson. I remember that distinctly. But the staff noted something curious. While his personal memories were obliterated, his factual memory remained intact. Do you remember any famous people or people you knew before the accident? Someone asked me the presidents, and I got all of the 20th century ones right. That was one of the tests from the doctors. Surprise twist, all he could remember were future presidents. BK knew that George W. Bush was president. He recalled that America had invaded Iraq in 2003. He answered historical questions with ease. This combination detailed public knowledge but a void where personal memory should be. It was almost as if his mind had been severed, like the characters in the TV show Severance. But, of course, there were some doctors who suspected he was faking. Maybe he was a fugitive. Maybe he wanted to disappear. Or perhaps this performance was just for attention. But others disagreed. The pain in his face, the panic in his voice, the disjointed thoughts, the violent reactions to touch, it didn't feel rehearsed. This man was something the hospital staff had never seen before. A living, breathing John Doe. And they had no idea what to do with him. Eventually, he was released from Memorial Hospital and forced to fend for himself on the streets. The man with no belongings, no name, and no past was now walking the streets of Savannah, alone and nearly blind. Not even the system knew what to do with him. He wasn't listed as missing. He wasn't a veteran. He wasn't in any hospital registry. As far as the state was concerned, he'd never existed. No one, not the doctors, not the police, not even the FBI, could figure out who he was. And in countries like America, you can't have a life unless the system says you can. Without a social security number, BK was doomed to forever live on the fringes of society. He would never be able to legally work, open a bank account, or receive assistance from any social services. Why is it so hard to get a social security number? The presumption is that I already have a number, so Social Security says I can't have another. Everywhere BK turned, a catch-22 awaited him. You need a social security number to get a job. You need a job to afford a place to live. You need an address to apply for ID. You need ID to get a social security number. In January 2005, 4 months after BK woke up into this life, he was finally admitted to the J.C. Lewis Primary Healthcare Center in downtown Savannah, a facility for the homeless and indigent. There, he met Michael Elliott, the center's director. Unlike the hospital intake workers who labeled him Burger King Doe, Michael saw BK for what he was, a man trying to reclaim his identity, not run from it. And so Michael asked the man if he had a name that he wanted to give himself. I remembered my name as Benjamin. The ward clerks insisted upon having a last name, so since they were calling me BK, I chose Kyle for a last name. Do you remember it spelled as Benjamin, or did you pick the spelling? No, I remembered it spelled as Benjamin. At J.C. Lewis, Benjamin Kyle was a model resident. Nurses described him as higher functioning than others at the center. Many patients were severely ill or battling addiction, but Benjamin had discipline. He read constantly from the shelter's tiny library, mostly science fiction. He mopped floors, fetched meals, cleaned bathrooms. Still struggling with his vision, he would clean by instinct, moving the mop in careful spirals around his feet. Eventually, a charity arranged for him to receive cataract surgery nearly 9 months after his discovery. The operation changed everything. He slowly created a role for himself, not just as a patient, but as part of the staff. He salvaged an unofficial uniform from donations: white pants, white shirt, white shoes. On his hip, he wore a jangled loop of shelter keys, a ring of purpose in a world that appeared to have no use for him. Among the nurses was Catherine Slater, a former accountant who had turned to psychiatric care for its human intimacy and moral rigor. Benjamin saw her as someone precise and thoughtful, someone who had a soft spot for underdogs. For Catherine, Benjamin was unlike anyone she'd met. Intelligent, reserved, gentle. His speech was soft, tinged with a Midwestern accent. Catherine felt safe with him because he wasn't the type to flirt or mess around. He was respectful and never crossed boundaries. She also saw the pain under the surface. His sense of being lost wasn't just in his mind. It ran deeper than that. It was like an existential kind of disconnection. He didn't just forget who he was, but lost his place in the world entirely. Catherine assumed that from his likable characteristics, Benjamin must have people who missed him and were actively looking for him. I figured it would take 6 months to figure out his real name, tops, she later said in an interview. Someone had to know him. He didn't just drop out of the sky. Catherine started posting Benjamin's picture on missing persons websites, online forums, and combed through databases. She reached out to local law enforcement, assuming that Benjamin could have been attacked and stripped of belongings before he was seen in Burger King. She even made a request to the FBI to investigate it as a potential criminal case. However, what she learned was incredibly frustrating. The Richmond Hill police had never opened an investigation because in their eyes, there was no evidence of a crime ever occurring. The FBI's Savannah field office also passed on the case, unwilling to take on what they saw as a bureaucratic headache. The message was clear: not knowing who you are wasn't their problem. What baffled Catherine wasn't just the system's silence, it was the system's indifference. It was the mid-2000s, a post-9/11 world obsessed with surveillance. Citizens were cataloged and tracked with GPS, drones, social security numbers, fingerprint databases, face scans, and NSA intercepts. And yet, Benjamin was invisible. No birth certificate, no tax record, no credit history, no driver's license, no known relatives. This shouldn't have been possible, but it was. But then, after 2 years of deafening silence, in 2007, FBI Special Agent Bill Kirkconnell decided to take on Benjamin's case. He collected Benjamin's fingerprints and ran them through IAFIS, the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System, the largest fingerprint database in the world. There's more than 60 million criminal fingerprints on file and more than 200 million civil prints on file. I thought there was an excellent chance that, maybe Benjamin had a criminal history. But even if he did not, given his age, he might have served in the military or worked for the federal government. Unfortunately, those results came back negative. They tried Interpol, the Canadian authorities, even the US Marshals, just in case Benjamin was someone in witness protection. Still, nothing. Despite no proof of a crime, Kirkconnell recognized the oddity of the case. The man standing in front of him was real, alive, and yet to the system, he didn't exist. Then, Bo Preston of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation wondered, what if Benjamin is in there under a different name? The database contained approximately 80,000 active missing persons cases, and it was worth a try. So she got to work. Preston requested a list of all missing persons whose descriptions might match Benjamin's, going back to the 1970s. It produced a list of 350 possible identities. With the help of a friend, she reviewed each one manually, case by case. Time and time again, she felt a flicker of hope, only for it to be quickly extinguished with disappointment. Still, she believed there was a chance someone might make a connection in the future, so she added Benjamin's case to the lesson plan of her training curriculum, just in case an officer in the future might recognize him. In the same year, Catherine Slater's patience was thinning. Her heart still broke for Benjamin, but the system had failed them time and time again. So she took matters into her own hands and turned to the media. That September, the Savannah Morning News ran the headline, "A Real Live Nobody." Then the Associated Press picked it up. News stations from across the country began calling. Benjamin Kyle was dubbed the Nowhere Man, the Living John Doe. The phones rang, theories poured in. For every promising tip, Catherine found herself pulled into a ray of hope, only to be crushed when it turned out to be yet another dead end. The cycle exhausted her. Meanwhile, Benjamin seemed to retreat inward. While she followed leads and made phone calls, he sank deeper into his sci-fi books. His detachment was hard to read. Did he not care who he was? Or was he simply guarding himself from the grief that could come from knowing? Are you worried that who you used to be might be someone you wouldn't like? I do not think that my basic personality has changed. I do not act like a criminal. My first reactions to anything are not how to scam money or to trick people. You seem like a genuinely nice fellow. I bet you were a nice guy before you lost your memory, or an assassin, which would be badass. I really hope that you regain your past and find out you have a hot wife and are in fact a billionaire cowboy. A police officer in Georgia once suggested, in jest, that since they cannot find me in the records, that I was never a criminal, or that I was just so good at it, I never was caught. Then, in October 2007, national television came calling. Dr. Phil, one of the country's most watched daytime talk show hosts, offered to feature Benjamin on his show. This was his chance to get his face and story out to a bigger audience than ever before. Maybe, just maybe, someone among the millions of viewers would recognize him. But first, producers wanted proof. They hired Harold Kopis, a former FBI agent turned private investigator, to vet the story. Kopis spent months interviewing everyone, EMTs, Burger King employees, shelter staff. He ran background checks on the name Benjamin Kyle and every known variation. He concluded, "I'm 90% sure this guy is telling the truth." They also brought in Dr. Jason King, a neuropsychologist from Atlanta, to administer psychological tests. His final diagnosis? Dissociative amnesia. To appear on the show, Benjamin needed to board a flight to Los Angeles. But without ID, he wouldn't get past TSA, so Benjamin had to be accompanied by an escort from the Savannah police. Catherine Slater went with him, reluctantly. The producers told her, "Without you, the guardian angel, the story doesn't work." Benjamin shaved his mustache and wore a brown suit and thick tie that Catherine picked out for him. On stage, across from Dr. Phil McGraw, Benjamin looked stiff, nervous. Dr. Phil asked, "What's this been like for you?" Benjamin replied in one word, frustrating. When asked what he was doing in Georgia, Benjamin guessed that maybe he came down to see the ocean. Then Benjamin shared his mirror moment after his cataract surgery when he finally saw himself for the first time.
I didn't see a mirror until a week after the operation. Got up that morning and my vision had finally cleared up. I started to shave and I just couldn't believe how old I looked because I looked like an old man compared to how I felt. Geez, the gray hair, bags under the eyes. I didn't feel that old. I didn't think I should be that old.
Dr. Phil then presented the audience with some age-regressed sketches in hopes that someone from his past might recognize him.
This is an age-regressed photo of Benjamin as he might have looked at various ages. Now, this is him today, how he might have looked in his 40s and 30s.
The episode aired October 16, 2008, to over 4 million viewers. A hotline was opened and calls came in from across the country. Claims of him being a classmate, a priest, an army buddy, someone's ex-husband. One woman wrote claiming, "He used to drink a lot. He'd hang with the kind of people who might leave someone behind a dumpster." Others theorized his memory loss came from electroshock therapy gone wrong, mutant fire ants, even alien abductions. In the end, in terms of producing any real leads, Benjamin's appearance on Dr. Phil was a flop. On the flight home, Catherine didn't ask Benjamin how he felt. There was no need. She knew the truth. It's one thing to be missing. It's another to realize no one is missing you. How has no one stepped forward to identify you? Has this bothered you at all? I don't know how nobody has stepped forward and identified me. I suspect the media has overrated themselves in how they think they reach all the people in the United States. Benjamin Kyle was not the first to vanish from himself, and he won't be the last. History has many examples of people who, like him, slip through the cracks of their own minds, some by trauma, others by will. In 1926, England, for 11 days, famed mystery writer Agatha Christie became her own unsolvable case. Her car was found deserted. She was found nearly 200 miles away, claiming no memory of where she'd been or what had happened. Some believe it was psychogenic amnesia, a rare psychological condition triggered by trauma. Others whispered it was revenge, retaliation against her cheating husband. Either way, it was a public incident that mirrored Benjamin's private one. Both were seen, neither truly understood. The next case was in Europe, the soldier who came back. He was called Theophylline, but only because that's what it sounded like when he tried to say his name. Returned from German custody after World War I, this French soldier was one of dozens suffering from deep psychological trauma. He didn't know who he was, and no one else did either. He lived nameless for years, passed between hospitals like an unsolved puzzle. Hundreds of families claimed him as theirs. None were confirmed. Like Benjamin, he existed in limbo. Only in 1930, 12 years after his return, was he identified as Octave Monjoyne. But even then, the war had taken more than his memories. It had taken his place in the world. Then there's Naomi Jacobs. She woke up believing she was a 15-year-old girl. The mirror disagreed. So did the child calling her mom. She was actually 32. It was 2008, but in her mind, it was 1992. She remembered phone numbers and how to drive, but not her son, not her adulthood, not the pain. Diaries became her roadmap back to reality, revealing a life marked by abuse, addiction, and breakdowns she couldn't recall. 8 weeks later, her memories trickled back, but for those 2 months, she was a ghost in her own life. Benjamin Kyle's condition may sound like something out of fiction, but it wasn't. Classic research into amnesia has long suggested that while long-term episodic memory, our ability to remember personal life events, is often impaired in cases like Benjamin's, immediate or working memory usually stays intact. As months turned into years, Catherine Slater's search for Benjamin Kyle's real identity had become an emotional odyssey. Then, in February 2009, she got a call from someone new, Colleen Fitzpatrick. A physicist by training with a PhD from Duke University, Colleen was no ordinary genealogist. She had built laser measurement tools for NASA and run her own optics company out of her garage, but by the 1990s, she had become obsessed with genealogy, and her sharp mind had already helped solve cases like identifying the remains of a child from the Titanic and putting a name to a frozen, dismembered arm from a 1948 Alaskan plane crash. When a colleague asked if she'd look into the mystery of Benjamin Kyle, she immediately took interest. Colleen flew from Orange County, California to Georgia to meet Benjamin. By this point, Catherine Slater had uprooted her own life, leaving her apartment in Savannah to move with Benjamin to a home outside town. Benjamin had left his job at the shelter, and now he was mowing lawns for Catherine's neighbors, doing what he could to survive. But without a social security number, basic employment remained out of reach. He couldn't even apply for benefits or receive food stamps. Legally speaking, he still didn't exist. Catherine called it a civil death. A man trapped in America, yet legally wasn't even an American. A citizen of nowhere. And yet, his memory, once a zero visibility fog, began to clear slightly. He recalled attending the Indiana State Fair as a child, where grilled cheese sandwiches cost $0.25. He remembered the Mexican food at Mama Elena's in Denver, and how he hated the service at a restaurant called Azar's. He remembered the 1976 film Car Wash that he watched at a theater in Colorado. He could still picture the shelves at a University of Colorado library where he once read back issues of restaurants and institutions. Piece by piece, a fragmented map of his past began to form. Colorado, the 1970s through mid-80s. After that, a void. But they wouldn't need to rely on Benjamin's memory to determine who he was if Colleen Fitzpatrick was successful. She looked through archived local newspapers across Indianapolis, Boulder, and Denver. She contacted motor vehicle departments in 3 states and had them run facial recognition scans against their license databases. Nothing matched. But still, Benjamin remained certain of one thing: his birth date, August 29th, 1948. Fitzpatrick combed through birth records, church registries, military draft cards, and more. She passed out flyers at restaurant conventions, knowing he once worked in food service, and even mailed them to shelters throughout Indiana. At Catherine's suggestion, Benjamin even underwent hypnosis, but the sessions yielded no breakthroughs. Next, Colleen turned to Benjamin's body. He had no tattoos, no wedding ring, but he did have scars. One above the collarbone looked like it came from a cervical discotomy. 2 crescent-shaped scars along his elbow likely came from surgery after a fall. Possibly the loading dock accident he vaguely remembered from Indiana. An X-ray confirmed metal screws in the joint, but they were too generic to trace. So, Colleen dug deeper still, into Benjamin's DNA. The FBI had already run his sample through CODIS, their 7 million profile database, with no luck. But Colleen wasn't searching for a one-to-one match. She wanted relatives. Using a donated testing kit from 23andMe, she had Benjamin's saliva analyzed and uploaded to a consumer DNA network. The results offered a small but promising lead. Benjamin shared a significant amount of DNA with members of the Powell family. This didn't mean his name was Powell, but it meant he likely shared a common ancestor with them within the last century. Further genetic links traced the Western Carolinas, especially Transylvania and Pickens counties. Colleen placed Benjamin's photos in local newspapers and began collecting DNA samples from the surrounding areas. Weeks turned into months, hundreds of hours of volunteer labor. Colleen's scientific curiosity evolved into full obsession. It was only a matter of time, she said. She believed she was on the verge of solving the mystery. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Benjamin abruptly and mysteriously cut off all contact with Colleen Fitzpatrick. This came as a shock to his roommate and caretaker, Catherine Slater. Did he really want help, or had he found some strange comfort in this limbo? When she finally asked why he didn't seem eager to uncover the truth, Benjamin told her, "Well, I've been in this identity, Benjamin Kyle, for a long time, and even if they figure out who I am, I'm probably going to feel like Benjamin Kyle." At first, it sounded reasonable, but Slater began to feel less like she was helping him and more like she was enabling what seemed to her to be a determination to avoid facing his past. Eventually, she gave him a deadline. She'd found him a shelter in Savannah and brought him a prepaid phone. On the last day, Benjamin asked to burn his old mail in her backyard. She refused. Too dry, too windy. He did it anyway. Without a word, he lit it all on fire. Then he walked away with nothing but a backpack. That was the last time she saw him. Slater would later call her time with Benjamin Kyle a hell of a drug. She had become addicted to solving him. So had others. All these people across the country trying to solve this case, she said, that's power. But she also blamed herself for mistaking his blankness for vulnerability, for pouring herself into someone who may never wanted to be found. After leaving Catherine's home, Benjamin picked a direction and started walking. His plan was vague. Florida seemed as good a destination as any. But he didn't get far before 2 Georgia sheriff's deputies pulled over. They'd seen his face before. Bo Preston, the police trainer, had recently used Benjamin's case in a training module uploaded to the FBI's VICAP system. The deputies recognized him instantly and offered him a lift to the Florida border. From there, Benjamin walked the rest of the way to Jacksonville. When he arrived, he tried to get into a homeless shelter, but was denied on the account that he had no ID. So he spent his nights sleeping in a field behind the local sheriff's office. Desperate, he called a young man he barely knew, John Wickstrom, a 21-year-old film student from Florida State University. Wickstrom had previously reached out, wanting to make a documentary about Benjamin's story. Now, Benjamin was asking for help, not just to be found, but to survive. Wickstrom contacted a local news station, which aired a short segment about Benjamin. Watching that broadcast was Josh Schrute, the owner of a quirky seafood restaurant called Crazy Fish. Something about Benjamin's story struck a chord, so Schrute offered him a job washing dishes. It was a gamble, but Benjamin didn't disappoint. At Crazy Fish, he quickly became the best worker in the kitchen. He was knowledgeable about every piece of equipment. He stayed late, eagerly accepted every task, and brought a peculiar charm to his workplace. But John Wickstrom's selfless efforts didn't stop there. To hopefully get his story out to an audience that maybe all the TV shows missed, the young filmmaker helped Benjamin set up a Facebook page and even got him on a Reddit Ask Me Anything thread, which exploded with activity. Redditors jumping at the opportunity to solve a mystery. How upset does it make you that you can't connect with your past life at all? Are you upset that no one has tried to look for you? I don't know. Puzzled, I guess. Mostly I stay so busy that I don't think about it, because I still have to get on with living. 10 years after his discovery, Benjamin Kyle had become a kind of public mystery mascot, featured by CNN, BBC, NPR, and even Dr. Phil. But with each passing year, the hope of solving his identity slowly faded. He didn't miss a family he couldn't remember. He didn't do what-ifs. What would you do if you suddenly remembered your previous life and found out that you gave yourself amnesia on purpose? And would you rather fight 100 duck-sized horses or 1 horse-sized duck? I don't play the what-if games. They can drive you crazy. 1 horse-sized duck. But if I had a horse-sized duck, I'd sell it. And when he did get curious, he'd spend hours on Google Maps, scrolling through photos of Denver or Boulder before giving up again, defeated. If you have memories of those 2 specific cities, why on earth haven't you gone to them to recover your memories by now? I understand money could be difficult when you can't make any and such, but it really seems like the most logical course of action, to go where your memories indicate. Up until very recently, I wouldn't have been able to go, because I would need to be driven. To fly, you need an ID. I live in the southeast and own an airplane. I might be able to take you from Florida to Indianapolis. I think it's a fascinating case, and I'd love to help. No ID required to fly in a private aircraft. Reddit didn't just listen, they mobilized, launching a whitehouse.gov petition asking the federal government to issue Benjamin a new social security number. Everyone needs to sign the petition to help this man out. Thank you. He needed 25,000 signatures within 30 days for an official response. He got 18,000, and while that was still impressive, it unfortunately was not enough. The petition expired. Do you still have hopes that you will find your original identity? Are there any not yet exhausted search strategies? If so, what? I think if anything's found out now, it'll be a stroke of luck. And then, as luck would have it, Colleen Fitzpatrick, the person who had claimed to have been on the verge of solving the mystery before Benjamin mysteriously cut off all contact, got wind of his story gaining traction on the internet and began telling the media that Benjamin didn't want to be helped. He just liked the attention. Benjamin responded by confessing on his Facebook the reason why he had cut ties with Colleen. According to him, she had begun withholding access to his data and exploiting his vulnerability. Colleen, of course, denied these claims, but this public fallout would turn out to be the turning point in Benjamin's case, because this would be how a woman named Cece Moore would get involved. She was a genetic genealogist and TV personality, but unlike Colleen, Cece specialized in autosomal DNA, the kind passed down from both parents. She worked with a team of volunteers she called Search Angels, building out hypothetical family trees. Cece and Colleen had known each other previously, but they would soon become enemies because of Benjamin's case. Cece was appalled by what Colleen had done to Benjamin, and so she set out to help him herself. Cece traced Benjamin's DNA to his Powell ancestry, identifying deep southern roots and narrowing the pool. But Benjamin's case remained stubborn, longer than any she'd ever tackled. Still, Cece insisted. It's only a matter of time. By May of 2015, the Crazy Fish restaurant had closed its doors for good. With nowhere to go, Benjamin Kyle had moved in with Josh Schrute, the man who once gave him a job when no one else would. But the arrangement was beginning to fray. When the New Republic journalist returned to Jacksonville to check in with Benjamin, he found Schrute lounging in a lazy-boy chair. He leaned forward with a conspiratorial air and asked a question no one had dared voice for years. So, you think he's full of shit? Just a year ago, Schrute had trusted Benjamin implicitly, but something had shifted. The more time passed, the more the story didn't add up. He's very exact on a lot of stuff, really analytical. You ask him about building something or history or tools, and he's incredibly precise. But when it comes to his own story, he gets vague. They sat on the porch while Benjamin, oblivious to the conversation, worked on his bicycle nearby. I'm wondering what the hell is going to happen. Is he going to have to live with me forever? He's getting older, his knees are bad. But if I told him to leave, he'd really leave. And then what? Back to sleeping in the woods? Benjamin remained a mystery even to the people closest to him. When Schrute confronted him about why he left Catherine Slater, Benjamin answered simply, she had to take care of her parents. So, you left amicably? We left amicably. She'd say that. I don't know what she'd say. Then, Benjamin walked off. Schrute, eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses, whispered, sometimes, I wonder if he's smarter than all of us. Without the Crazy Fish to give him structure, Benjamin's life shrank. Once a week, he biked 3 hours across Jacksonville to visit a food pantry. Otherwise, he lived on oatmeal, thickened with textured vegetable protein from a downtown health store. He'd lost 30 pounds in just 3 months. In a second Reddit AMA, a user asked, do you fear death more because you're old and no longer remember having lived a life? I am beginning to think that death may well be a friend. Once he could no longer work, Benjamin wasn't sure what he'd do. Living at someone else's sufferance is difficult for me, he confessed to the journalist. As much as I need money now, I should just claim I was kidnapped by aliens or brainwashed by the CIA. The money I could make off that. But there was something deeper at play, something uncomfortable. People needed Benjamin to become someone again, but maybe he didn't want to. Maybe he was afraid of what he might return to. The past could be worse than the unknown. Maybe, in a strange way, his mind had done him a favor. A decade had passed since he had woken into this life behind a Burger King, and media attention was fading. BK's identity, it seemed, might die with him. Then, one morning in June 2015, everything changed. Cece Moore, genetic genealogist, puzzle solver, leader of the Search Angels, called the journalist with 3 words. We found him. For a moment, he didn't understand. Then it sank in. The impossible had happened. Cece had called Benjamin first, but he had hung up almost immediately. Now, he wasn't answering. She was worried. An hour later, Benjamin was on the phone with the journalist. His voice was trembling. He said he was in shock. He had so many thoughts about how he was going to handle the information and was having a hard time focusing. Ironically, the breakthrough had come from a feud. A member of the Powell family in South Carolina had seen a Facebook post about Cece's clash with Colleen Fitzpatrick. That Powell woman had happened to be on her way to a Powell family reunion and collected several DNA samples from distant cousins. With those samples, Cece was able to fill in missing branches of Benjamin's family tree. Benjamin was so relieved, and for the first time, he cried. They narrowed it down. A mistake in the Powell family tree had misidentified a great-grandson. Correcting the record led them to Indiana and to one school yearbook. There, in the 1967 Jefferson High School Annual, was Benjamin's unmistakable face. He had been right about almost all of the few things he had remembered over the years, except his name. William was the second son of Furman and Marjorie Powell, born in Lafayette, Indiana, just north of Indianapolis. He had attended Catholic school, just like he suspected. His father died in a boating accident in 1969. His mother passed away from cancer in 1996. He had 3 brothers, like he'd said since the beginning. 1 died young. 2 were still alive. 1 in Florida, 1 still living in the Powell family home in Indiana. Unfortunately, though, it seemed the birth date Benjamin had repeated for years, exactly 10 years before Michael Jackson's, was off. Cece couldn't find a birth certificate yet, but 2 genealogy websites listed William Powell's birth year as 1951, not 1948. Still, after 11 years of wandering, suspicion, and doubt, the man once called Burger King Doe finally had a name. In the hours after Cece Moore told him his name, Benjamin wasn't entirely sure what to feel. He sounded like a man dizzy with emotional vertigo. On the phone, his voice trembled, breath hitching in ways that suggested tears. He said he was in shock. After 11 years, the man with no past suddenly had one. But when Cece mentioned William Powell's birth year, 1951, his tone dimmed. For a decade, Benjamin had been clinging to a single unshakable memory, that he was born in 1948. He needed that to be true, because when you lose everything, even one fact can become your whole identity. But the next day, Cece called back with news that seemed like a cosmic joke. She had made a mistake. William Brent Powell had been born in 1951, but the man who once called himself Benjamin, William Burgess Powell, had in fact been born in 1948. One of the few things he'd clung to had been right, and that small correction meant more to Benjamin than anyone could have imagined. In the fall of 2015, Benjamin, or should we say William, returned to Lafayette, Indiana, the town he had fled decades earlier. His older brother, Furman, answered the door of their childhood home, a crumbling Queen Anne house coated with ivy, its porch sagging like a tired sigh. Furman didn't invite William inside. "It's bad in there," he said quietly. But they shared breakfast downtown. Over coffee and eggs, they talked about their shared history. The Powell family's history wasn't exactly pretty. Their father, Furman Sr., was a World War II flight engineer. Their mother, Marjorie, a Navy photographer. Their house had been tense, haunted by hoarding, emotional coldness, and violence. Marjorie had doted on William, her favorite. Furman Sr., however, took out his pent-up rage on the boy. Furman never described the abuse in detail, but William had fled the house at 16. In his 20s, William Powell worked odd jobs around Lafayette, a janitor at a strip club, a handyman, a warehouse loader. In 1976, he vanished. One day, he just missed dinner. Days later, his red 66 Rambler was found abandoned near the Oakdale Dam. Furman filed a missing persons report, but William wasn't missing. He'd simply left, vanished from his family forever. The only man who knew where William had gone was Charles Chico Gutz, a former co-worker. When contacted for information, Charles didn't hesitate. Charles and William had been drinking buddies in Lafayette. One night, they had apparently decided, on a whiskey-fueled whim, to leave town for Boulder, Colorado. William had recently gotten a settlement for a workplace injury. With that money, they drove west. Once in Boulder, William worked as a cook at a restaurant called Azar's, the restaurant he'd remember having bad service. William later joked he was disappointed to learn he had cooked there. That food wasn't very good. Charles also worked restaurant jobs in Boulder, but eventually he decided to return to Lafayette. Before Charles left, William asked him to hold on to his tools. He said, "Keep these for me. One day I'm going to want them back." And then, for nearly 3 decades, William Powell disappeared into the American void. Between 1983 and 2004, there's no record of William's existence. No taxes, no address, no phone, no debts, no crimes. Nothing. Experts say it's rare, but not impossible. Thousands die every year without ever being identified. Powell didn't leave a legal footprint because, perhaps, he'd stopped walking in the world where footprints mattered. If he had died behind that Burger King dumpster in 2004, William would have gone to a Potter's Field grave, a grave for the unidentified and indignant. Instead, by chance or providence, his brain erased his name, but not his will to survive. In October 2015, William flew back to Indiana with a documentary crew. Family members greeted him, calling him Bill. He remembered none of them, but he nodded, listened, and smiled politely. One cousin handed him a family tree. William ran his fingers over it. For the first time in years, his history wasn't a question. It was printed in ink. At the end of the year, William moved into a modest 2-bedroom house in his hometown, a short bike ride from his childhood home. He made friends with neighbors, fed their dogs, fixed their appliances, but he never told them who he had once been. He continued to avoid stepping inside the house where it all began. William worried that returning home might reawaken old memories. Not all memories, he believed, should be remembered. Sometimes he would get lost in Lafayette. Streets had changed, businesses were gone, but more than that, time itself felt warped. One moment he saw the city as it was, the next as it used to be. It's like my mind wants to see it one way, and my eyes see it another. In those quiet winter months, William sometimes asked himself, had he lived as Benjamin Kyle for all those years? Was that a name he chose in a fugue state, or one he had heard somewhere and borrowed like a coat? In the end, it's easy to say that we're all just collections of memories and experiences. But what is left when those things are taken from you? When your identity becomes nothing but a knowledge that you exist? For Benjamin Kyle, born William Burgess Powell, that question was once everything. Now, it's just a shadow trailing behind the man he's chosen to become. He didn't recover all the pieces. He may never recall the 20 years that went missing. But he found his name, he found his brother, and maybe, just maybe, he found peace. If you enjoyed this video, then consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. It's the best thing you can do to help us keep making more videos, like this one about the mysterious disappearance of the $30 million jackpot winner and how the internet cracked the case by luring the suspect online.